Well, the whole purpose of this work is restoration of the being, because the being has been put into this chaotic world, this chaotic environment, that because we come in without the right tools, without the right compass, without the right kinds of parental direction, cultural direction, community direction, we wind up doing things that tear us down. So from the get-go, we come into a world that tears us down. And when one realizes that, or when one feels enough pain, whether it's physical, maybe they've got difficult symptoms, maybe they're carrying too much weight, maybe they're emotionally feeling imbalanced, they're mentally overwhelmed, their peace is lost, whatever the reason, they get to a point where there's so much pain that they want to change. Pain is a call for change. So when they have that much pain and they realize that it's bad enough to actually change, because most people, to change is a really big deal, to have any kind of change. So in order to get to that point, most people have to feel a lot of pain. And when they do, they decide they want to change. And then if they come to the right place, hopefully they'll come to me or someone like me, I'll be able to help them to restore themselves, to take that which has been broken down, torn down, where boundaries have been broken in their own lives, where they haven't had the direction, and give them the direction, show them how to restore those boundaries, show them how to rebuild themselves. And there are about 6 layers to our being, essential layers. There's the physical, the emotional, the energetic, the spiritual, the mental, and the sexual. And those are usually torn down in unison, because everything that we're exposed to in our world tears those. If you look at any advertisement, it will tear all of those down and break all of those boundaries in one go with one advertisement, okay, with one directive. So, and any time people think, well, how does all that correlate? Well, your being, your field, when we talk about boundaries, it's an intimate space. It's the space in which you grow and develop. So if those boundaries are broken when you're young, in any of those ways, if you're exposed to violence in movies and television, and or of course in today's world in all these video games, or if you've been violated in any other way, emotionally, maybe you've been bullied, or your parents gang up on you, or you weren't given the climate and the conditions to grow. If you take a tree, a seed, or any sort of plant, and it doesn't have the right conditions, then it's not going to grow properly. Well, the same is true with children, of course. It seems an obvious thing. But yet, if we really look at the soil that they're put in, we realize that ultimately we have to accept the fact, if we're going to be honest, that it's not good, it's not healthy soil, it's not going to produce a being with all it should be equipped to have, all it needs to be equipped to have in order to interface with all that life presents. So what one has is a situation where they don't have adequate boundaries, and then they're exposed to a continuous stream of things that would further insult and offend their being, and that's why this whole breakdown happens, and that's why people will tend to collude with things that are life deteriorating without even realizing it, because they've never really been taught the difference between the two. They've just been brought into a world and raised up in a world where, I call it accepting the unacceptable, where we're taught to accept that which is truly unacceptable just because it's the norm, just because it's typical and common. So first thing has to happen is people need to see, if someone wants to heal truly, they need to see that all of these levels of their being have been interrupted through their development stages. And when they start to see that, and they can see why they've colluded in things that have been harmful, then they can, number one, stop colluding with these things, because it's kind of like with the detox process. It's great to get the waste out of the body and to mobilize this acidic accumulation, but one needs to stop taking it in as well. So with the restoration process, let's remove those things that are that have been accumulated burdens on the heart, on the energy fields, in the mind, whilst we simultaneously prevent them from entering anymore. And then we start to develop these really strong boundaries, and we become impervious. Actually, the goal is to become impervious to things that would be detrimental to us, and that's what it means to be a mature adult. It's what it means to be, if you're the alpha wolf, or you're a mature animal in your space on the savannah, in the forest, wherever it is. It means that you've come into your fully fledged ability to protect the young, to protect your environment, your ecosystem. Of course, you can't help it if the man comes in and tears it apart. But the point is, we don't even understand what maturity is. It's not an age you reach. It's a stage of being able to maintain your boundaries, to restore yourself and then maintain that restoration. And then the goal is to help those who can't help themselves. And that's what all the, if you look at an elder, for example, in all the native traditions, there's around 13, 14 years of age, there's an initiation process that the young women and the young men go through. And it's not just a rite of passage in and of itself as an endpoint. It's actually a rite of passage so that they prove to themselves and to their community that they are capable of protecting the community. So the reason they're celebrated after their rite of passage, after their initiation's been complete, is because now they're seen as something more. They're seen as that being, that person, that individual that can be depended upon to protect that which is worth protecting, that which day by day that community goes about building, and it's that which has value. They will protect that which has value, and they know the difference between what has value and what doesn't, which most people in our culture have no idea the difference between the fool's gold and the real gold. And as I often remind my kids, it's really easy to break something down, very tough to build. It's 100 times harder, more time consuming, more effort required to build something. That it's like the 2-year-old with the blocks, and they build and they just throw it over. Well, it's really easy to do that, and that's what most people wind up doing with their days and with their lives, with their situations, is they will tear things down without even realizing it. Like, for example, even just saying, okay, well, they want to be stronger, they want to be healthier, they want to have their cleanse, so they'll do a 4-day juice fast, and then in a moment they'll destroy it all because they didn't take the time to really anchor and ground themselves afterward, and then they get pulled into a social setting where they break those boundaries in themselves, and it's so easy to destroy all that hard work. It is hard to do a 4-day juice cleanse. It's really hard to fast, even for 24 hours, 48 hours. It's really hard to get over those nights. And then what happens, they'll, in a moment of weakness, they'll just give it all up. And so we really have to honor, wherever we put effort, we really have to honor that, because it takes so much, and then we have to maintain it and protect it. And that's a matter of habit, because most people are not in the habit of working hard in those areas. They might be in the habit of, they may have a category in their life where they've learned how to work hard. Maybe they're a workaholic, and they'll work on a document really hard, or they're a lawyer, they'll work on their briefs really hard, and they'll do their research really well. But then there'll be areas in their life where they just say, well, because I'm busy, in the office, then I have this excuse not to take care of myself and my body. This is our real worth, our real value, our mental clarity, our emotional strength, our physical integrity, our physical prowess. This is what that's the true goal, that's the true value, and our ability to protect that in our environment, and among others, especially those, again, who can't protect themselves, to teach the children how to do so. You can deflect anything you need to, you can field everything you need to, because, let's face it, life sends its tests every day, multiple times a day often, and you will have the wherewithal to contend with it, and for it not to break you down. You'll have the ability to manage and put it all in its place too, because when you know your boundaries and you know what's allowed to be in your field, what you will accept in your field and what you won't, then it's very easy to know what to say yes to and what to say no to, and when to put things far afield from your life versus bring them in close, because you'll recognize the gold and you'll want to pull it in close. See that saying, it takes one to know one? When you've achieved that state of wholeness, you'll recognize it in other people, and you'll know who should be in your circle. And because now we're dealing a lot with the whole term of the narcissist concept. That term comes up a lot now, and it's because we are breeding a whole generation of narcissists. All the selfies, and the focus is inward in a dysfunctional way. And so what happens is you have people who are attracting that into their lives because they don't have healthy boundaries, and the narcissist, whether they're conscious of it or not, sees that as an opportunity to feed off the other person's energy, and then they wind up in a relationship together, and then the whole thing, snowballs. So this is going to happen more and more, and people need to be very, very clear about, very clearly able to identify people who would feed off of their energy. But you can't do that until you understand how energy works and how to have these healthy boundaries in your own being. And when you do, you wouldn't let that energy be drained or consumed by a vampire or a parasite, for 5 minutes. And there's two things that are really interesting about children that play into this. One is that when very small children are in the theta brainwave state, it makes them like a recorder, so they pick up everything around them, which is essential to their development because it enables them to learn so much so quickly, just a sponge. And Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about this extensively. His research is how I know about this. And the other thing is that they're constantly searching for boundaries. So often this testing they're doing, or when we feel like they're being difficult, it's just their way of testing boundaries because they genuinely want to know where the boundary is. They actually inherently don't want to cross boundaries. They just want to know where it is, and they want to be taught that healthy boundary. It's instinctual in a child to have that. It's part of what's enabled the human race to get this far. It's actually a gift to the child to help them establish the boundaries and show them exactly in a very sane, calm way, but very clear, and most importantly, being consistent. The gift they give us is they force us to see where we have gaps in our boundaries and what we're not aware of and where those blind spots are. And when we start to see them, we get really robust in that sense, and we no longer become food for them. In a way, yeah. I mean, I suppose that the ultimate effect, hopefully, that we'll have is that if enough people establish their boundaries and don't allow themselves to be energetic supply for the narcissist, then the narcissist will no longer be able to feed off of them, and they'll have to face up to their own issues. And it's usually a case of not having had the right kind of attention as a child. Love is so important. If we're not loved properly as babies, we're going to be a disaster for the rest of our lives. It is the most important thing to be held in your mother and father's arms, to be breastfed, to actually feel that time, the heart-to-heart connection. If that can't be for whatever reason, you've adopted a child or there's complications, that it doesn't mean that there can't still be this in-arms period, extreme closeness. I do believe that co-sleeping and nursing on demand, all of these things are really important. They can be adapted to one's philosophy, but the larger concept, there's a book called The Continuum Concept. What is her name now? Leadoff is her last name. I want to say Jamie Leadoff or something. But what she did, it was fascinating. She was studying a group of mothers and their children I believe it was in South America. And she was astonished to find that these children, they follow their mothers around like little ducklings would follow the duck. And she'd never seen this before because in the Western world, kids are running amok and like everyone's everywhere, and the last thing the kids are going to do is stay within sight and just clearly know where they belong. Again, it goes back to boundaries. They knew where their boundaries were. And she said, what is different about these people? What do they do? And what she discovered was they have what's called an in-arms period. In-arms for 100 days. The babies are attached. They're in the arms of either their mother, their father, grandmother, grandfather, cousins, aunts, uncles. They are in arms. Mostly their parents, but the whole community has been holding them. And when you think 100 days, also the Tibetans believe that, I think more than the Tibetans, but that's one group I know has a strong history of believing that the child actually shouldn't even leave the house for the first 100 days. And I think also, if I've got my facts straight, they're not even named until that 100th day or after that 100th day. It's called the fourth trimester. It's a time when the baby doesn't recognize itself as being separate from the mother yet. So, of course it would cry if it's left alone, particularly in a crib in another room, another wing of the house. These giant mansions today, you could never see your baby, get the baby nurse, and it's all done. It's not to say that one shouldn't have help. It's exhausting, especially because we live in a world that's so cut off. So most of us don't live with our extended family. Most people can't afford to even have help in the house, so they're sending their kids off to daycare, and it's really hard. And my heart goes out to those mothers and fathers because it's painful, and the baby's feeling the pain, they're feeling the pain, but because of the economy that we live in, this sort of monetary mess that we have to find our way through. There are a lot of places where compromise at certain points of life are essential, and then of course the parents come home, they're exhausted, the kid has been in daycare all day and then has been mixing with so many things that you wouldn't want to have happen either, and then they're sick, and then it's a terrible it's a very convoluted, unfortunate situation, and the only way to rectify it is through education, through realizing what's happening and getting in on the game, getting in on the mess and seeing the chaos for what it is, and extricating yourself to the degree to which you can by what you're able to comprehend, and then adapt into your life. And if you do that little by little by little, even if you're in a really compromised situation where maybe you have very little income and your children are in daycare and they've had their vaccines, and you might think to yourself, oh gosh, but what do I do from here? I'm in the system, I'm in the matrix, I'm stuck. Well, you're not, because if you even get that little bit of light, just hang on to that, keep your eye on it, and it will start to increase. And you'll be able to make better and better decisions because you've got the number of the matrix, you've got the number of the system, and you can see how it's directing you in order to feed off of your energy, and then you can choose not to take that direction and therefore not to give it your energy. And then you start to take your power back, you take your life back, you take your family back, you take your children's energy back, you help teach them healthy boundaries so that they're not fodder for this continuation of the system. It's having the awareness. Increased awareness equals increased intelligence, and that starts to fasten itself together. The only other requirement is the effort, the discipline to do it. So it's one thing to become aware of it. It's hard to do it, not only because it takes the physical exertion to make the effort to do that which is required to bring greater order to your life, but it often requires a certain overcoming in your family and community situation, because often that kind of clarity and awareness and action that results from that, it can be a real point of contention when people in your immediate field who have not had that awareness and don't see things the way you do see you acting on it, and they start to feel threatened. They don't like that you're that you're ruffling things up, doing things differently, and it presents a challenge to them. But what's really important is for people not to worry about the challenge they're feeling. You can't manage that and make these changes in your own life. You just have to keep nose firmly to grindstone and let other people do what they will. Let them deal with it. It's not your stuff. Really, leave that with them. Don't get pulled into drama around it. Don't feel like you have to defend yourself. If you know something to be true, it's resonating with your instinctual human evolution, and that has more validity to it than someone's misguided, erroneous idea of what life should look like. Well, things are being dismantled and things are changing rapidly now in the world. I think as people start to wake up, and as people start to take their power back, they'll realize that they're actually natural leaders. That's the beautiful thing about getting your power back. It's like, wait a minute, you have a voice, and you can start saying what is true. I think that was a big thing for me just in my personal life, because I had an extensive history of abuse, and from 4 years old when it began, it shut down my voice, but I didn't realize that happened to me. So I just found that I was allowing other people's truth to rule my world, and little by little you can become very, very small. And it's funny that even though I've done some things in my life that I'm proud of and that have had a voice, it hasn't been my full voice, which even only as an adult, at almost 44 years old, I'm finally able to open up my full channel and not hold back. Because it's, first of all, I used to stutter. I used to, I used to garble my words. I used to, just make a mess I couldn't get the words out. It was, nothing like, I mean, even now I feel like I have a long way to go in terms of really bringing my throat chakra to its full clarity. And I look forward to that evolving. But I was totally shut down. And then I speak often about my bulimic history. And that, I believe, is a desire to express one's truth, knowing that those who actually need to hear it would never be able to listen to it or receive it in any way. And so the person who feels that, who has that locked up truth, knows that. And whether they're conscious of it or not, mostly they're not conscious of it, but they still need to express it. And there's such a huge, such an enormous amount of suppressed truth that having that purging enables them. It's that violent expression that, like, you're able to actually get it out. At least you can energetically move it, even if you can't verbalize it. And then what you can do, in that situation too, is you can remove it from sight immediately, with just a flush. So, it's really important to talk about these things, because we all have suppressed truth and we all deal with it in different ways. So one person might deal with it in that way. Another person might try to drown themselves in alcohol or pharmaceutical drugs, or recreational drugs, or shopping, or sexual, kind of relationships, and there's so many different ways to shut oneself down, to numb oneself to one's truth. So, the problem with that is then people wind up walking around with a lot of shadow and living in their shadow self, as opposed to living in their illuminated self, in their conscious mind, in their awareness. So the more we shut down, it becomes compounding, it becomes exponential. Whereas, by the same token, the more we wake up, and if we're really willing to see these parts of ourselves, they become a gift, because we'll no longer be wasting energy in those areas, and instead we'll be able to direct that energy into positive things. It depends a lot on the disposition of the person and the personality, because some people tend to do things in little bits, and other people tend to have giant epiphanies. So ultimately, it's kind of like cleansing. Let me put it to you this way, because there's always an analogy that goes back to the body and physical cleansing. As above, so below, so we can always correlate things. When someone gets into the cleansing work and they're doing it right, they will, within a week, 2 weeks, they'll know they're on the right track. They'll feel that their body's shifting, that they have more energy, that they're dropping weight, their skin's clearing up, their headaches are going away, that their joint pain is leaving, that whatever symptoms they have are going. You know that within a couple of weeks. It's happening. And then it gets better and better and better, because, again, it becomes exponential, because you get the stronger the body becomes, because so much accumulation leaves, the stronger the body becomes. It has more innate and more inherent energy, and it's conducting more energy, and so it can do so much more. It's like suddenly, more and more is online to help. And then the organs kick in at a much greater rate. The cleansing organs start doing their work. Everything starts moving exponentially more quickly. So likewise, what will happen is people will start to see something. They'll start to realize, oh, I can see how I've been manipulated by the world's directives. I can see how culture has shaped me. I can see how what I've accepted as life isn't necessarily life. It's not necessarily true. What I've been taught in school, what the media tells me, what I've been handed down through my race or my religion, my lineage, and you start to get a glimpse of that, and then you start to see how it all starts to fit in other areas of your life, and how, in terms of your consumption of food, for example, or the things that you're interested in, and what you maybe have been exposing yourself to in terms of entertainment media. It's so many things, even down to the fluoride in your toothpaste. You're like, wait a minute, what? Fluoride was used to make people docile in the concentration camps. Yeah. So there's like all these things that start popping up, and you start looking at your skin creams, and you start thinking about the soap, and why does it have all these chemicals in it, and then you go into the health food store to get your soap instead, and you see that there are other things that make a lot of sense. But then you're also sold a bill of goods in these natural health stores too. So one has to be very, very careful, because there's so many. I mean, it's all capitalizing on one's desire to change and be healthier, and suddenly, you know, you're buying into things that aren't true there too. So you have to become aware no matter where you are. But it starts to, you know, popping like popcorn. Like, you know how in a little bit the popcorn starts to pop, 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 and then all of a sudden it's like in the old days, you know, when you used to pop popcorn in a pan or in a pot. So that's usually how it works. So if you just get that little door opens, that the shutters start to open, the light starts to come in, and then you think, wait a minute, let's go outside. I don't have to stay in this house with the doors closed and the shutters firmly closed and the curtains drawn. There's life out there, and then you get out of the house and you realize that nature has something to teach you, and then you can start really waking up very, very quickly. It can be very quick because one of the key laws of the universe is cause and effect. So your cause comes from your vision, which is going to determine your choice. So every day, all day long, we're making choices. I mean, all day long. There's not a moment when you have the ability to even, you know, choose obviously what you're thinking all day long. So everything is a choice. How you're going to move yourself, where you're going to sit, you know, just everything, what you're going to pick up next, where your mind is going to go. It's all choices. So if you get the vision and you start to see where you want to go, and you can make your choices line up with that. You know, Christ said, keep thine eyes single to the light, and your whole body will be filled with light. All we have to do, I mean, that can be interpreted in so many ways, but in this way, I want to just, you know, use the analogy. If we can just catch a glimpse of where we need to be focused and stay there, stay single to that. Don't get distracted by all the other stuff that's never worked for you before. It's never going to work for you in the future. But this light will. Let it increase. Keep an eye single, and let all your decisions, all your choices, in that minute, in that hour, in that day, for that week, for that month, and then we go back to cause and effect. So those choices are going to have a knock-on effect, and then they're going to start to multiply. So if all of your choices in that hour, in that day, line up with that vision that's focused on what I would say is life generating. So when we talk about the light, it's not like black or white, you know, it's because what we know about black matter and dark matter is that the life force is robust in the dark matter. So it's not about that, so per se. People can misinterpret sometimes when we talk about light and dark. But let's say the life generating versus the life deteriorating. So keep your eye on that, and your choices line up with that, then that's going to multiply and multiply and multiply. And it's going to make it easier as you go, because it's like that, you know, the law, one of Newton's laws of motion, an object in motion remains in motion. So we know that it's really easy to keep exercising when you're on a roll. It's really hard to start from zero and get yourself motivated going, because you feel bad about your body. You think, you know, you have all these excuses you can make. You're worried about failure, you know, but once you've gotten on a roll, it's so easy because you're reminded of how great it feels. You're given the sort of you know, the payoff of your body shifting and changing in the right direction. Same thing with these choices. You start to see they're paying off, but don't think it's going to be easy, because often things as they're paying off challenge us. You know, like other people coming into our lives and questioning what we're doing. For example, what do you mean colonics? Aren't those unhealthy? Don't those destroy your flora? I mean, we could go on and on. It's endless. Yeah. If you let them distract you and you forget what you've been taught about why they're so beneficial and why they won't destroy your flora and why they're only going to make your intestine more robust, then, you know, you could wind up missing out on that ultimate effect. We have to do the cause that generates the effect. We have to make the choice that generates the change. But as we do so, and as it multiplies, again, the object in motion remains in motion. If we're doing that consistently, it's going to become easier and easier. And that rather than it just being a little point of light that we're focused on, a little point that is life generating, we're going to be eventually, very, very quickly, surrounded in that which is life generating. And that's not to say that we're not going to have challenges, because it seems to me, what I've discovered in my life is that the more you align with truth, the more testings you get. And it's kind of like, I guess a little bit like a university or a higher education system where, you know, you have to confirm that you got it. You know, you have to like reinforce all the time. So a great warrior is going to be called into battle. To be built up and be a strong warrior doesn't mean anything if you can't go out and fight the battle. So to be somebody who's in possession and understanding of the life force and that which is life generating, needs to constantly reinforce that. And in doing so, it gives other people permission to do it, and it inspires other people to do it too. And then it's those early warriors that have to go in there and hold space for other people to get it, and that's really, really hard. But the more other people get it, the easier it is for everyone who wants to create a world that's surrounded in life force, drenched in life force, in the fertile soil of life force. So the more we help wake each other up gently, lovingly, but also if somebody's really in that life generating state, they're not going to be critical and harsh, and they would have cleaned up those shadows already. So you can tell a lot about a person just by how they deliver the message.
Yeah.
If a person has that propensity to be super driven, then they just need to channel that propensity into this interconnected life-generating approach.
Yeah.
Take that same energy, that you might have wanted to exploit with, or to do something that maybe wasn't negatively exploitative, but maybe it was to take over a company, or maybe it was to be the best at something. Go and be the best at that thing, but see that it isn't at the detriment of your soul's desire to grow, because that's what it means to sell your soul, to overlook the fact that you're here to bring your soul into a way more expansive state. And if you do things that compromise that, then you're really missing out. You're basically giving up your biggest opportunity, the real reason you came here, for something that is temporary and and is ultimately not serving you. But you can do it all. We can be the great athlete and grow our souls. We can be the great business person and grow our souls. We can there's other than exploiting life, other than something that would feed off of the energy of others, and where there's those two can't be in alignment. You can't be growing your soul and be exploiting life. But if you choose a worthwhile, noble, honorable ambition, it will align with growing your soul. This is air traffic control. This is Grand Central. This is where it all happens. So, and most people in the modern world are completely cut off from their bodies. They're in their heads all the time, and they need to, go to a specialist doctor. We talked about this a little bit before, to tell them what's going on in their body. We need to be in unison. There are, from head to tip to toe, we should be completely feeling everything that's going on in our body. We should feel what's being digested when. We should feel, our, underneath our feet, what's the temperature there? Like, what does it feel like? We should be able to, at any moment, just really feel into our body. Where are we holding stress and tension? Just everything. As opposed to just feeling the hangover you had from drinking too much the night before, or as opposed to just feeling bloated because you just ate too much. Like, we should really be able to feel the nuances inside of ourselves, our bodies, and we then need to move every day the way we're supposed to be, that we're designed to move. There's so much dormancy in the average person's body, because even if they do what I would call sort of a gross motor exercise, a very simple exercise, like, say, for example, running. You're using your big muscle groups and everything, but the nuanced muscle groups aren't getting attention. So unless you do things that activate them, you're going to wind up with a very you may have a lot of stamina and cardiovascular endurance, but it doesn't mean that your body's really moving the way it was designed to move. Because if we think about how, I always like to go back to the movie Avatar and the island, or the planet of Pandora, and the people on Pandora and how they moved and how everything was so alive, and and they were connected with the trees and the insects and their threads of life connecting everything. And that's how things are. The fact that we can't see it with our naked eye anymore, the average person can't see it, it doesn't mean it's not there. We're not raised to see it. We're not trained to see it. If we were, we would see all these threads connecting everything. And sometimes in moments, people who are, even in this culture can see them. I see them. I have moments where I see golden light and in hexagonal sort of beehive kind of shapes. It's amazing, these patterns and threads. But there are all these threads through our body, and we need to activate them. They deserve to be heard. They deserve to have airtime every day. And so if we do, as you said, if caring for our body and moving well, keeping it clean, keeping it nourished with life force, not just like thinking, oh, we need this many calories in, calories out, fat grams, protein grams, amino acids, all this stuff. Not like that, but truly understanding that we are walking cords of life force energy. We are just meant to be conducting. So the body is the pillar. And let me phrase it differently. All of these levels are essential pillars. And if any one of them is off, we're going to be off. But if we can keep the body in a ritual, in a steady kind of day in, day out routine that we know is predictably going to keep us in a predictably positive state of being, then it becomes an anchor, a foundation for everything else in our lives. So to know what works for you, to do it consistently, will enable your body, at the very least, not to be a liability. Because if the body's a liability, then everything else becomes problematic. But if the body can be a strength, then everything else can be workable, manageable.